Hey buddy, watch this.
Yeah, folks, we got some tiny minions in this custom cards video, and you may notice I don't look normal, no green screen, probably some weird lighting, maybe still some audio issues. Still settling in at the new house, but we're getting a little closer each time you see me. Hopefully things will continue to improve, but until they do, we got to talk about these custom cards. Small minions was the theme this time. You guys submitted a ton of cool small minions like this one from Faroon. It is the gold Shire minstrel. It's a 3-mana 1/1 neutral epic, and the battle cry will summon you a 1/1 cat, and that will upgrade every turn. So if you keep it in your hand a few turns, you can get like 3 1/1 cats, or 5 1/1 cats, or 10. No, you can't get 10. There's only 7 slots on the board. But this may sound familiar, right? This is a lot like Rafam's Scheme, the Scheme card we saw for Warlock in Rise of Shadows that just never quite got there. It turns out top decking a card like that was really, really bad, right? It felt bad just getting a single imp. It took a long time to snowball. Goldshire Minstrel, I think, fixes a few of those problems. First and foremost, you get 2 1/1s by default, so top decking it doesn't feel quite as bad because the Minstrel itself is a 1/1. That also means it just kind of takes less time to upgrade compared to its peer. It also has Battle Cry synergies, which can be crazy. We saw before, like Desert Hare with Evolve is a ridiculous shenanigan. All kinds of classes could use this outside of Warlock for similar wide board strategies. Think about things like Druid, for instance, loves having lots of small tokens on board. They might be willing to wait on a card like this one to fully upgrade as well. So essentially, I like this from that standpoint. Mechanically, it fixes problems from a real card. But even better is the story of this card. The artwork, the name is perfect. There's a minstrel sitting in an inn. The longer he plays music, the more cats come to listen to the show and enjoy it. And that's just so freaking cool. And that won me over, if not mechanically. Just the art, name, and story theme for this one fit so perfectly. This is an ideal tiny minion. So moving on, let's ramp things up a ton. This is the Oblivion Amalgam from Sajaster. It's a 7-mana 0/1. It has all tribes. Now, we have not seen this all tribal affiliation in the past as a, text on a card at least. Of course, we've had amalgams. So that's a little bit of a shortcut there to allow you some more card text. I'm fine with that. A lot of people have utilized that before. But this also just has pretty much all keywords, or at the very least, base keywords in Hearthstone. And that makes this thing an absolute monstrosity if you can manage to give it any stats. Because by default, none of those really do much. I mean, a Divine Shield taunt's okay, but not for 7 freaking mana, right? So you need to give it some stats. And I think that's really cool. If you can build around this card and support it, say like a hand buff deck, for instance, or by buffing it once it already hits the board, you've got yourself a pretty scary minion. Now, I have not thought of all the different ways you could possibly break the game with a card like this one. I want you guys to tell me. It doesn't have charge, so, the instant win potential doesn't seem to be there, which I think keeps this in check. But if you can think of a cool way to make this card completely busted, please feel free to share that in the comments. But I love the idea of this amalgam that just turns into some kind of gigantic monstrosity. If you look closely at the art, you can actually see exactly that happen. And something we've seen in Battlegrounds a fair bit as well. And seeing that constructed in this form would be another great execution of a small minion. Moving on next to the Fragile Familiar, another tiny, tiny, tiny minion. This one doesn't have any health, which you might be like, wait a minute, what? How can you have a minion with 0 health? Well, this card from Willing Away answers that question in a pretty creative way. This has Rush and Reborn. So if you were to play this immediately, it would just die and instantly be reborn as a 1/1. Reborn as a mechanic means it comes back with 1 health. So the Fragile Familiar comes back as a 1/1 with Rush. So it's not like terrible. It's worse than something like Spring Paw, but it's, kind of playable. But similar to our previous cards, if you can use interactions or synergies with this, it becomes really cool. Think about, for instance, Scavenging Hyena with this card. You play it out, a beast dies immediately, thereby instantly buffing your Scavenging Hyena. Also, the follow-up with Rush could buff your Hyena a second time. And I imagine there are all kinds of additional cool synergies you can start to explore with a card like this based on minion deaths. Think about like Cult Master, for instance, to draw you a card. And that's a really cool idea. Also a card who can hand buff to make it really interesting too. But I love this idea of taking like almost no stats and still turning it into a really neat execution in Hearthstone gameplay itself, and Fragile Familiar does that just perfectly. Next up here we have Dinkin Spark Fingal from Terminator 468, a 0 mana rogue minion, 1/1, with a death rattle that reads, add a copy of this to your hand at the start of your next turn. So we have here Dinkin, who is apparently got something going on with portals and maybe some time travel, and I guess she's time traveling her way right back to your hand every time she dies, which is really cool for a class like Rogue who loves having 0 mana cards in hand to activate death rattles. Now, it does come with a little bit of a delay. Your opponent doesn't necessarily have to activate this death rattle for you, so there are some risks and downsides, but if you can get your Dinkin to start rolling, or maybe create multiple copies of a Dinkin, you can set up for some pretty bonkers turns, playing gigantic Edwins, cheating out those Necrogram Apothecaries even faster without a coin, so on and so forth, which means this is like the perfect little synergy card for Rogue. And I love the idea of just stuffing a bunch of these in your hand. Maybe you don't even need combo synergies. Maybe you just overwhelm your opponent with an endless army of 1/1s, because you can just dump a full hand of these every time and keep getting them back. And that's a kind of cool idea too for a game plan. So I don't know exactly how this would be used, but I know it's perfect for the Rogue toolkit. And it seems like there are a lot of fun ways to use it. And again, great story for this one. So all in all, Terminator put together a really nice tiny minion. Next up here, we have Lonely Chicken from Dat Mage Doe. As all chickens are, it's a 1 mana 1/1 beast, and it has a similar enrage sort of effect. It reads, after this survives damage, fill your board with 1/1 chickens with rush. So apparently, if it survives, it's not lonely anymore. It brings some friends along. Thank God. I was getting pretty sad about the lonely chicken there. And this is a really cool idea, and in fact, a much bigger payoff than most of the chicken cards we've seen so far. Those were like overkill, you get some bonus stats, you know, enrage on the normal angry chicken, you get some bonus stats. But with this one, you actually get a lot of bodies to trade with, and that can be pretty overwhelming. So if you manage to get this buffed up and you manage to, you know, force a positive trade of some kind with it, then you're going to do some pretty crazy things. And in fact, things like Quest Hunter would love a card like this one, probably because it's got beast synergies. It's just toss in a buff here or there, get it some extra health with a Houndmaster, and boom, you're making a ginormous swing turn. Also, any class with a ping style effect like Mage could maybe use this in some way if you could hand buff it, or you just use some kind of, you know, even a Defender of Argus or something. The question is, would it be worth it? And I don't know, but I'd love to see a Lonely Chicken actually get there in terms of playability. All the other chickens have very much not seen success, and this one might just be enough to get it there. Seems like a pretty powerful card. It just needs some support, and that's a fun idea for a successful tiny minion. Moving on here to the Lavaborn Whelp. It's a 1 mana 1/2 dragon for Paladin from Sadathar, and the battle cry reads, your hero power becomes add a 1/1 Whelp to your hand. And we've had some hero power manipulation cards in Paladin before, say summoning a Murloc instead of a Silverhand Recruit, but this actually takes it in a slightly less tempo direction because you're adding dragons to your hand, not to the board. And you might think, well, gosh, that's a pretty big downside, Regis. You got to spend an additional mana to get this 1/1 here. Why would you want to do that? That makes your hero power objectively worse. Well, not if you have dragons and dragon synergies, and in fact, hand buff synergies in Dragon, all of which Paladin currently can do. So making sure that you always have a dragon in hand is possible with a hero power like this one, and having lots and lots of stuff to buff with things like Dragon Rider Talritha. That's really cool, and I think this would be awesome in that style of deck. Now, is that going to be a good deck? Probably not. You don't normally want to sacrifice tempo for that much hand value, but who cares? It might be great anyway just to see that in action and try it, and maybe having more dragons in hand or some additional buffs for that would actually help that deck get there in terms of power level. Not to mention just having, you know, a nice 1 mana 1/2 dragon to kick things off, or a cheap set of dragons to keep the buff chains going off Talritha could be awesome. So I love the idea of this card. I think it's really cool. It shifts the hero power for Paladin in a different direction while exploring an archetype that's still kind of fringe for the class. So now let's take a look at Kazakh, the spawn of Yogg Saron. This one's from DeSantis D. It's an 8 mana 0/0. Again, playing with the idea of a minion that doesn't really survive when you play it, and its battle cry is insane. I love the idea of this. Cast random spells until this minion survives. So, in some ways, it is a neutral 8 mana puzzle box of Yogg-Saron, because in many cases, this minion won't survive. You won't hit a minion buff or target this in a way to keep it alive. So often you're going to cast a clearly maximum of 10, as this card reads, for 8 mana for a neutral puzzle box. And that kind of brings back Yogg of old, but in a controlled fashion, because 10 spells is considerably more limited than Yogg. And first off, I like that idea. But also, this thing can backfire big time, right? So say like one power word shield, for instance, and you've got yourself at 8 mana 0/2 that drew you a card, which probably in the scheme of things isn't ideal. But that's what makes this kind of idea fun, is that it's Yogg, but with a big risk and a big downside, because Yogg was powerful. Puzzle Box of Yogg-Saron, good card as well. This needs some kind of check on its power level, and I love that it spins Yogg on its head. Usually you were sad if your Yogg got killed before he finished animating or finished casting all of his stuff or silenced himself, so on and so forth. But for this, it's basically the opposite. You kind of want this to be dead. You don't want it buffing itself. That ruins your chain. And I think turning that idea of Yogg on its head and offering a new way to see Yogg in the game would be really, really cool. Plus, it's just an excuse for a 0/0 minion, which is awesome. So next up here, we have the Dungeon Crawler from Delaferferg, a 1 mana 1/2 neutral epic battle cry. Discover a legendary minion and shuffle it into your deck. And I like that this card sort of tells its own story. This idea that you're going to be dungeon crawling through your deck to maybe find a boss, maybe consider it a treasure, but nonetheless, you got to dig for it, you got to crawl for it. And that's really cool. And this just feels like a real Hearthstone card to me. It's one of those fun cards that may not be particularly good because legendary minions on average aren't great. Putting them in your deck means they're really delayed. So not many decks would be able to find room for this one, I don't think. But there might be a handful out there, and there's a lot of shenanigan potential. And it just feels like a good card. Lets you play with legendaries you might not otherwise own. Add some surprises into the mix for gameplay. And I think all that's really cool. So Dungeon Crawler to me feels like a very realistic, very complete, very fitting card for Hearthstone. Next up here is the Ethereal Egg from Blue Zombie Blood, a mage card. It's 1 mana 0/1 with a death rattle that puts a random mage secret into the battlefield. And I like this idea of having an egg that results in a spell instead of a minion. Most eggs we've seen in Hearthstone so far have been minion-based results, because you normally hatch a minion, but this is a magical ethereal egg, so it's hatching a secret instead. And that really captures the idea of sort of unwrapping a box. It's like, what's inside? It's a secret. I don't know. I still don't know. Like, I got all these layers. And I think it creates some cool moments for your opponents like, man, do I kill this or do I let them ping it down? Maybe I make them spend the mana on it. Maybe I don't want to deal with the secret now. Maybe I want to deal with it later. I think all that's really fun, and it puts secrets in a new light and probably puts some secrets into play that otherwise probably don't get a lot of play, all of which are probably good things for Hearthstone. Maybe this could be abusable in a secret mage and wild. I don't know about that for sure. It seems a little too slow to me. So all in all, probably the right way to do secrets, and a really fun double down on secrets. Like, what is this secret? It's super secret. I don't know. And that's why this is a pretty good tiny minion. And then finally here we have the Wolpertinger, a 3 mana 1/1 beast from Bado La Bandit. And I looked up the Wolpertinger, apparently some kind of mythical creature from Germany, if I'm not mistaken. And it apparently does indeed look exactly like this, which I think feels very sort of Shutterwalk or Bandersnatch-esque in a way. The name just kind of seems like it could be something that gets tossed into Hearthstone. And the effect here reads Battlecry adapt 3 times at random. And I love the idea of bringing adapt back. I thought that was a super cool keyword. It probably won't ever happen. But this does look like a creature that has adapted a few too many times and done so in a seemingly random fashion as well, with some wings and antlers and fangs. So really good capturing of the mechanic here. Now from a power level standpoint, that's probably way too inconsistent to be good. There's some weird adapt rolls here, right? You could get things like +1/+1 3 times, and you got a 3 mana 4/4, and you're like, okay, that's actually not too bad. But then there's also like, you could get +1/+1 and can't be targeted and stealth. And you're like, ooh, a 3 mana 2/2 is stealth. I don't know if that's all that exciting. Like, it's okay. So you could also just get like, +3 attack 3 times, and you could have a 10/1 for 3 mana, the ultimate rager, which probably wouldn't be good either because it's too susceptible. So do I think this card would be competitively viable? Almost never. Like it would very rarely ever make sense. Maybe with some kind of crazy battle cry synergies, things like Quest Shaman could perhaps double this up and make it worth it. But in most cases, I just don't think this card would get there. But that doesn't matter because there's another one that's really, really fun. Cool idea, great execution of an idea here from Bottle Bandit. All right, folks, that wraps it up for this custom card review. Thanks for the awesome tiny minions. Next time around, I want you to make some Star Wars themed cards. That's right, we're heading out of Hearthstone, celebrating the release of The Rise of Skywalker with some Star Wars themed cards. That's right, lightsabers, Darth Vader, vehicles. I want to see the Millennium Falcon, whatever it is, show it all. Make me some cool cards, spells, minions, hero cards, whatever you want, just as long as it's Star Wars themes. The details and links to submit those cards will be in the description below. But until then, thanks much for watching, and until next time, game on.